I mean, they were supposed to be used, to begin to buy up these home mortgages, keep people in their homes, stop the collapse of the housing market. After Congress voted for that, after being, of course, given $150 billion, that's $150 billion in bribes, Henry Paulson just changed his mind. And of course, when they reread the legislation, they found out that Barney Frank, who, of course, is the chairman of the House Banking Committee, who's also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, just like Henry Paulson, Barney Frank had forgot to put into the legislation that the money had to go for the bailout to stop the cascade of home foreclosures. And then Henry Paulson gives that money to his friends on Wall Street, but he just forgets to tell them they've got to spend it in the United States. So they spent it in India, and they spent it in China, and they spent it in Dubai, and they spent it in Spain. And then we wonder why money's hard to get in the United States. How could Barney Frank have been that stupid? How could you said Henry Paulson, both of the members of the Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderbergers, how could they have been that stupid unintentionally? I think people have to begin to understand this whole thing is carefully, being orchestrated because they want this crisis.
Well, one of the reasons, and I knew this some time ago, I haven't spoken of it nor dwelled upon it, but several years ago, Barney Frank was in love with a man named Moses, who was working for Fannie Mae. And one of the reasons there was no investigation of what was going on there, a thorough investigation, was that they were blocking it because they were lovers at that time. And evidently, this guy Moses said, "Hey, look, Barney, I don't want this thing exposed, so cover it up, as long as you can." And then I guess they fell out of love, and then it get exposed.
Well, of course, but then you find other people there very, very high in these organizations, tied into the Council on Foreign Relations, tied into all of these other organizations. There's a fellow named Franklin Raines who was there, Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, and here's an Oxford scholar, Council on Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission, all the usual requirements, and of course doing everything wrong with Fannie Mae, and no repercussions, fraudulent. They're putting out fraudulent reports. Nothing's ever done to him. He's allowed to retire with a great big fat, I think $41 million, something like that. Because when you're part of the elite, why you're not held to the same standards as common people. And there really is an elite, and it's made up of the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderbergers, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Group of 30, and then the people who tie into the other occult organizations. And they're simply above the law. Until the American people understand that, and are willing to help us get the information out, and then begin to understand that behind all of these organizations are powerful spiritual forces, nothing is going to change. So, but you really think that people are beginning to wake up around the world, Bob?
Yeah, I think that they are, and it's good because they know who to identify now. They know the groups to look for. They know the connections. And we're getting a lot of emails to that effect, people who are saying, yes, I know the people in my country are hooked up with them, and this is how it works, and we're not going to let them get away with it. Most of this came in answer or in reference to the possibility of a new world currency, which deprives any nation of their sovereignty, first and foremost in the minds of most people who love their country. And so they were discussing that, and they said, we're not going to let it happen here. So I've translated that into if things go very, very bad, which I believe they will, and they try to implement a world currency, there'll be world revolution.
Well, I really think, Bob, that that's exactly what they want. That'll give them an excuse for their world martial law. There'll be enough people out there who say we've got to have order. We can't have violence out there. And they'll oppose the people who are trying to preserve freedom. I mean, these people are really, these people give greed a bad name. Henry Paulson, the CEO of Goldman Sachs, was making somewhere about $40 million a year in salary and bonuses, and he quits that to become Secretary of the Treasury, where he gets a salary of $180,000 a year. Now, why would anybody in their right mind leave a job that paid him almost $40 million? Somewhere people say 45, but 35, 45. What does it really matter? For a job that pays $180,000, well, of course, he becomes really the economic dictator. And he says, AIG is just too big to fall. AIG is too big to fall, so we're going to nationalize it. We're going to pay all their debts. And then what does AIG do? Why, they begin shoveling money over to Goldman Sachs. About $12.5 billion went from the taxpayers over to Goldman Sachs. And, of course, they let AIG go bankrupt, which they should have done. That would have solved the problem, but Henry Paulson's doing a great job. But is he working for the American people? He comes from the Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderbergers, just like Barney Frank and so many of the rest of them. Is he really working for the American people, or is he working for the establishment? Incidentally, I could say that the CEO of Goldman Sachs happens to be a member of the Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations. Just one big happy family. But, of course, you're not going to hear about this from Time Magazine or Newsweek Magazine or, of course, U.S. News or World Report, because the latter two are owned by people, members of the Trilateral Commission. The Time is controlled by people from the CFR. It's really sort of a slam-dunk situation. And it's the greatest transfer of wealth we've ever seen, and the average American has no idea what's going on. But you pick up there, Bob.
Right, and they don't know what's going on, and that's why we're doing what we're doing with the publication as well as the programs on the air. The administrations, and that's plural, in Washington for many years, both Republican and Democrat, have been controlled by these people. And, in this last election, it was pretty obvious that Team A was brought in to take over for Team B, or vice versa. And this is the way they run things. The public does not have a clue or chance to make any changes.
And of course,
by Congress and then just go forward and do what they want to do. You talked earlier about the coming G20 meeting in London, and
hold that thought, Bob. We'll cover that as soon as we get back here in just a minute, right here at Radio Liberty. Bob, you go right ahead. You were talking about the G20 meeting.
Yeah, and the number of demonstrators. What's going on here is multifold. It isn't very often they have G20 meetings. The number one thing that they're talking about is the possibility of using another method of having a reserve currency. And, of course, the Bilderbergers in New York and the United States, they don't want that to happen because they've got a license to steal or on a gravy train, have been since 1948, and they don't want to give that up to China or Russia or anybody else. On the other hand, they've made a drastic, terrible mess out of the financial and economic situation, not only in the United States, but it reflects all over the world. And so they're going to talk about the usage of SDRs, which is the special depository receipts, and those are nothing but a fiat currency created by the IMF. They were created in 1969, and incidentally, we have a piece on this and the links in Wednesday's issue coming out, explaining what they are, special drawing rights. And they used them before and they didn't work. And what it is a transfer representation from one country to another. And it's unmeaningful. So what I think they're going to do is say, look, we want to have a different currency, and nothing will be solved at this meeting. but they will lean toward using the top 10 currencies in the world in a basket to supplant the dollar over a period of several years. I think this is what they'll come to on that. Now, the second item is they want a czar of some kind to run all of the financial